improve the efficiency of their research and also make their research more open and increase their interaction of their research. So the first workshop will be taught by Sarah and Brian, and they will introduce the remote sensing and data management. They are experts in their research, and also they use a lot of remote sensing imaginary and LiDAR point clouds, and so they are well known of how to manage their data and also make the data more open, more shareable, and more replayable by others. So thanks for your preparation and looking forward to your presentation. Okay, yeah, start.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we wanted to start by acknowledging that here in Vancouver and at UBC, we work, live, and play on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and we would like to acknowledge that others attending remotely might be located on other Indigenous lands, and we are cognizant of that, and as we work through our activities today. So just as, there's a lot of slides going around. Today we are going to have an introduction. We're going to talk about some wonderful women that are representing Earth observation sciences. We're also going to talk about the importance of sharing research data, what it means to have a research data management plan, and we're going to work through an activity associated with that. We're going to introduce some different repositories, including Borealis and Zenodo. And then also briefly what to expect when submitting to UBC Circle. And then finally, some closing remarks. We'll also incorporate the activity alongside that. So my name is Sarah Smith-Tripp. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate, and I research recovery after catastrophic wildfire. I use a combination of remote sensing tools. Specifically, I use drone-based LiDAR as well as Landsat imagery that is available and openly accessible from the 1970s until today. And then I'll also allow Brianne to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brianne. I'm a second-year master's student, also in Nicholas Coops' lab. I'm working in remote sensing. My current project is about using open source satellite imagery as well as LiDAR to improve hydrological modeling, specifically after a forest disturbance. So a lot of my work and a lot of my past work has had to do with open source data sets using large amounts of remote sensing data and just developing, starting with bad habits and then developing better habits later in terms of that. So yeah, I'm excited to chat with you guys today. First we just want to welcome you to this workshop. As UA introduced, this is a series about empowering women plus in forestry. We want to kind of acknowledge the limitation of this term women plus, but basically the way we're going to be talking about it today is just women, gender fluid folks, trans folks, other folks that are under and misrepresented in forestry. So the goal of today is to provide an introduction as well as some best practices, available tools, and hands-on experience with data management, specifically in the idea of remote sensing. So we're going to focus a lot on acknowledging and working through these barriers. And then also we just want to get to know who else is in the room today. So I would like to encourage you to scan this QR code with a mobile device if you can, and then that's just going to bring us to a Mentimeter where we're going to get you to answer some questions, and we can just have a general discussion about who's in the room and what kind of experience you have, so we can make this workshop tailored a little bit more to you. So to the friends online, I'm going to share a different screen. Okay. So hopefully people online can see that now. Okay. Okay, so our first question is, can everyone access the Menti poll? Everyone's good to go? Or Elaine, you're saying no? Oh, you got it now. Okay, so the first question is, what is your area of study? We would love to know what is your main focus. I have a feeling it's going to be a strong majority in forestry, but if there's some other folks in here, we're happy to hear about it.
Yeah, geography.
Okay, maybe we'll give it a couple more seconds, but so if anyone is not in forestry, maybe the one or two people who selected other, would you like to share what your background is in?
Oh, I select
Oh.
the. Yeah, my background is GIS, so more focus on how to mapping different geospatial related attributes on the map. So, but now I'm working on the deep learning based tree species mapping. So also mapping things, but using some AI related techniques and also advanced computing, something like this.
I was the other one. I selected other because I feel like I identify more as a geoscientist, ecologist rather than a forester.
Okay. And anyone in forestry, would you like to share what you do or work on generally? I know there's some other remote sensing people in here, but maybe the folks who are not in remote sensing.
I work on improving operational planning for industrial forestry.
Awesome. Thanks.
Is Greg your supervisor?
Yeah.
Oh, big move on. No worries. Okay. Okay, so our next question here is, how do you identify in this field? And this can be as so much as a job description. So are you a master's student, a PhD student, a researcher, a postdoc, an undergrad student, or in other terms, are you a leader? Do you see yourself as an innovator? And just generally some other terms that come to mind when you talk about yourself. Like if you were given an elevator pitch, how would you identify in the field that you're working in? PhD student. Volunteer, interesting. Communicator, educator, these are all fantastic words. Okay, cool. So we kind of have a mix here. We have some PhD students, some master's students, maybe some postdocs and different people in the room. So I think that sets us up really well to have some engaging discussions with each other, because I think there's going to be a lot of different ideas and feelings in this room. So that's awesome. Okay, and now kind of moving into the meat of our presentation today, how much do you know about research data management? That can be absolutely nothing, or that can be, I'm an expert and I could be giving this workshop right now. Maybe some folks use research data management, but they've never heard that exact term before. So we'll get into that in a little bit as well, but okay, awesome. So seems like some people, a lot of people, most of us are familiar with the idea of research data management, but maybe haven't heard that term before, or they've never actually had formal training in it, and it's more just something that you've heard about and you want to work it into your workflow, but never have been formally told how to do so. Okay, and now last one for now. How do you think of research data management? So whether you know what that term means or not, maybe just some rough ideas of what you might think of when you hear the term research data management. Nice. These are good ones. So we have organization as one of the largest things, which I think is a large part of research data management. So that's really great to see. Shareable, reproducibility, workflow, helpful, managing files, efficiency, sharing. These are all, I feel like we're honing in on what this next 2 hours is going to be about. So that's great. Does anyone want to elaborate on some of the terms that they threw out there? There.
I read a lot of studies where they provide sort of a vague description of the data they're using. So I think if you actually post the data set that you used of your research, that allows other people to go and try out your methods and makes it more transparent and useful. So I would personally find that very helpful in reading other papers.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, all right. Okay, so now going back to our slides for a second. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so research data management. Research data management actually has 5 core parts of it. It is the parts of collecting that data, documenting that data, storing that data, sharing that data, and presenting the data. And there are standards associated with research data management, and those standards often vary by industry and application. We're going to introduce you this. So this workshop was funded by the Digital Resource Alliance of Canada, which actually sets those standards for Canadian universities. So we have resources that help us learn how to collect and document that data. And this is something that can be kind of hard coming from a graduate student perspective, because we work on our own independent projects. And when we're thinking about really big collaborations, this research data management process is something that's really focused on in the grant application by the principal investigator. So if you are working with somebody who's like a science coordinator or something, within the grant that brought them on and pays them, is this research data management theoretically. So for example, I'm part of Silva 21, and under Silva 21, grant application, which is a large 5-year project, lots of money, there is a research data management program associated with every single project. And so I have my own levels of research data management, but the project that funds my research also has this upper level of research data management that we have to adhere to. So that's just a brief primer. We're going to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty later on.
Okay, so thinking about the definition or kind of explanation that Sarah just gave, we want to think about research data management also in the lens of remote sensing, which is, I'm assuming, why a lot of people have shown interest in this workshop, is because remote sensing provides a lot of data that needs to be managed, but can also really bolster any research project or a lot of different research projects. So just broadly, Earth observation data is acquired using active or passive methods, and this is commonly associated with remote sensing, which is the acquisition of this information without direct contact. So this can be things like satellites, synthetic aperture radar, airborne, spaceborne LiDAR, which is light detection and ranging. And this is often used to tackle research questions around climate change, resource management, agriculture, disaster resilience, and disaster prevention. So specifically, why do we want to think about research data management for remote sensing is because over the last few years or last few decades, there's been a ton of new advances in remote sensing that have vastly increased the amount of data that's available to us. So this is coming from things like improved spatial and temporal resolutions, increased open source data sets, lower cost of acquisition. So now we can go away and collect this data, and a lot more people can do it because we've lowered the cost. And this has just created this giant surge of data that's available, which is amazing for people to use for their projects. But then maybe we're a little bit behind on how we manage this data and store it for others to easily access it. So this kind of leads to questions like, how do I access this data? What are good practices when analyzing this data? Where should I store it? And how can I make my data that I'm using open access to other people? So we're going to try and tackle a couple of those questions today. In the rest of this workshop. So yeah, just to kind of bridge these examples together, we're talking about this very high level of like remote sensing data, LiDAR, but then we'd like to just give a couple examples of what this might actually look like in terms of a specific research project.
Yeah, so a great example, my research, we have drone collected LiDAR data over a large chronosequence, so a lot of different fires in the northern interior. And so this is just an example of LiDAR data, and my LiDAR data is all hosted under Silva 21's Globus data repository.
And just some other examples from my research specifically, I'm using satellite-derived vegetation indices. So I have acquired open access satellite imagery and used someone else's open access code to go away and calculate specific indices from the satellite imagery that was open access for me to download. And then I'm taking that and using it to improve a hydrological model. But this data looks like 15 years of monthly imagery collected over a watershed of around 30 kilometers squared. So it ends up being quite a bit of data that's getting stored. Just another example from other work that I'm familiar with is using new data fusion approaches to create better, more enhanced satellite imagery, but then this results in a lot more data if we're augmenting the spatial or temporal resolution of a data set. So this ends up looking like a whole lot of data. Yeah, and now to go back to the idea of who is actually in Earth observation science and who do we see using these new data sets that are available, and who is feeling like this is accessible to them in terms of their research. So these are some statistics from the Global Gender Gap Report, which is a global report that gets put out basically creating an index that shows how much we're seeing representation in different things like economics and science research fields. I just have a few statistics here. But yeah, basically this looks like it's an index that's calculated from economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, political empowerment, and health and survival. And in 2024, we see this global index as 68.5, which has been a generally increasing trend since 2006. But if we narrow this down to the space of artificial intelligence, data programming, networks, and cybersecurity, this ends up being actually 30% as compared to 68.5 that's reported as kind of like the bigger picture number. So when we start to look at the STEM workforce, they've derived some more statistics from LinkedIn, which is not the best representation, but gives us a good idea. But roughly 28.2% of the STEM workforce is made up out of women compared to 47% in the overall workforce. So yeah, just to give an idea of kind of how women and underrepresented folks are being are able to access Earth observation science. Oh, that one. Okay. And a little bit later, we're going to touch on some kind of inspiring figures that we see in this space. But to talk specifically about, instead of just STEM and the general kind of like global picture, looking at specifically Earth observation science, there's a study done by Karen Chen that was a bibliographical study to kind of observe what are trends in authorship in the Earth observation space. So we can see that there's a really interesting figure that they put together in their paper that we'll show another time later in the presentation. But basically 10% of researchers with an H index above the 95th percentile are women. This is a very small representation, and only 20% of influential first authors are women. Women on average have a shorter career by about 2 years compared to men in this space, and they often publish less. So compared to 2.2 papers per year, we're seeing only 1.6 for women. So there's a decently big gap that we can fill here. Okay, I encourage you to go back to the Menti once again, and we're just going to have a bit of a discussion around this.
It's showing up.
Nice. Yeah, so feel free to answer this question in terms of how true these statements are for you as a person who works in the data science, data management, and advanced computing space.
Oh, interesting, bimodal.
People like no one said anything. Oh, could you copy and paste the latest one? Yeah, the last one. Thank you. Okay, awesome. Okay, so nearly everyone is really interested in learning more about these topics, which is fantastic. And the second prompt, I have felt strongly encouraged to improve my skills in this area and explore these topics. We see quite a few people say that they have been really strongly encouraged to pursue topics in this space, and then a little bit of a distribution on the less encouraged side. So we kind of have a pretty broad range here of whether folks have felt encouraged to be in this space or not. I've encountered barriers to working in this field or knowing where to start. I can personally identify with that statement of having a lot of interest in this field, but not really knowing where to start, because especially with large data management, it's kind of a big step to get into it, of knowing where to even get the data. What do I do with it once I have it? And trying to find resources that are accessible and kind of make sense for the questions that you're trying to answer. Awesome. Okay. And then now more of a brainstorming question again. So what kind of barriers might women and other underrepresented groups face in the field of Earth observation, data science, and research data management? So either from your own perspective as someone who identifies in this group, or as an ally or a self-identified ally of these people, what do you see as barriers to entry in this kind of working space? So this could be things from not being encouraged by supervisors or superiors to have these practices integrated into your research, or this could be not being encouraged as a young student to take courses in high school about computer science and being encouraged instead to take other courses, or yeah, really whatever you think. So I think some really good answers coming in here, like few opportunities given, being unaware of what is out there for you to be able to access, mentorship being a big one, not being taken seriously as a data science or having the free time or the opportunities to work on these kind of things. Does anyone have anything that they would like to elaborate on or just comment on, or just any experiences, stories that kind of relate to this question.
I have one. My mom over the break was like, "You were never bullied in middle school," and I was like, "That's the bald face lie," because the one coding class I took and my lowest grade ever was actually a coding class in 7th grade, where the boys in 8th grade all bullied me every single day about my inability to properly make a 3D duck in like coding, and so it started very young. And there's also some great stats that like boys are like given more time to like play on computers than women. So just, yeah.
I would also say from a pedagogical approach, the way that men and women, our cognitive abilities and the way we learn is quite different. And most of the way in which we teach coding and data and science is geared for greater benefit of men.
That's really interesting.
Interesting. What are the main themes in the way that women learn versus men?
Well, usually women benefit more from like increased course structure, where like we learn from discussions and reflecting, and then having extra time to work in groups and things like that. And women just benefit from those things more than men do. So when you have classic course structure that's like just lectures or labs, and it doesn't provide that interaction, then men are more likely to succeed in those kind of courses.
Interesting.
Awesome. Okay, and next kind of open floor question. What do you think might be helpful for people in overcoming these barriers, or what has helped you in the past? For me personally, I feel like it's a lot of discussions like this where you understand that things that you've faced in your life is not uniquely something that you have to take on yourself, that there are a lot of other people who also share kind of the same insecurities and barriers to entry that you may feel, just a feeling of community in the sense of being able to learn and being supported to learn. So women leaders, open science, yes.
Open repositories.
Different teaching styles, that's great. A supportive supervisor and team environment, mentorship at workshops and conferences. Absolutely. Study groups, discussion groups.
Seeking mentorship from postdocs.
Fantastic. Using the people who are already in your life or who you'd like to extend your network to help empower you in this space. A sharing and learning networking community. And that's also something that we're hoping to build today, just through everyone being here and sharing their thoughts and opinions and learning together. And then also we'll be kind of like summarizing this and sharing these resources with you after today. So hopefully you can continue these discussions and also use all of the resources that we're going to get to a little bit later. But yeah, thank you so much everyone for answering these questions. Okay. Okay. All right. Not. Okay. Yeah. So kind of considering all of these things makes me really excited to see some pretty awesome people doing great things in this space and also doing a lot of work in terms of collaboration and encouraging access and diversity in these kind of in this field that we're working in. So one of the people that we just want to show as kind of an example of someone that you could hopefully look up to or reach out to or start a conversation with, just in terms of helping you get started or furthering your work in this research field. But one of them is Morgan Crowley, who is a PhD who did her research at McGill, but now is one of the lead scientists on the WildFireSat mission. And Morgan is really awesome. We had a chance of meeting her personally this last summer, and she was also one of the founding members of the Ladies of Landsat group, where Landsat is one of the remote sensing satellites that provides open access data. And Morgan, as well as some other incredible folks, put together a working group that encourages, just underrepresented group and women to work in the space of Earth observation science. But Morgan is a fantastic human and has done some really great stuff in this field.
Yeah, another really wonderful woman working in this space is Africa Flores. I had the experience of being at the American Geophysical Union in December, and this woman just like approached me at like 7:45 in the morning. She's like, "Hi," and I'm like, "Hello," and her name was like, "I'm Africa," and then she introduced me and she described her research, which mostly works on like water quality modeling, using open available NASA data. She's originally from Guatemala, and so she uses it to try and improve the water quality within Guatemala. She actually lives in Arkansas, which is actually where NASA is based, which I think is hilarious. But she was the 2020 Geospatial Woman of the Year, and it was just really cool to have this woman just come up and just broadly introduce herself to me, and then for me to do some follow-up research and just realize how powerful of a woman in science she was. So.
And then our last kind of highlight is Karen Chen, and they are an assistant professor in the Department of Urban Design and Planning and the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health at the University of Washington. So they are the author of the paper that I talked about and pulled those stats from the Earth observation kind of first author bibliographic study. And their research right now focuses on the impact of heat on human health within Mediterranean urban areas, but they are predominantly focusing on machine learning, climate variability science, epidemiology, and using multi-sensor remote sensing data. They're also an award winner of the NASA Early Career Investigator Program in Earth Science, and also a winner of the Leading Women in Machine Learning for Earth Observation kind of recognition in 2022. But yeah, some people who are doing some really exciting work, both in the areas of Earth observation, but also in accessibility of Earth observation. So these are just some pretty cool people if you're ever interested to go be inspired or just read about them. Yeah. Yeah, so now we kind of want to shift the discussion to how open science can actually be used in order to make these tools and this data more accessible to other people. So open science has a goal of making science and research more accessible and transparent for all people. It's basically driven by a growing demand of scientific collaboration and advancement. And the ways that people kind of think that we can achieve this is through open access to publications by removing paywalls, open source software, publicly available data sets, as well as opening the peer review process. Okay, and another discussion back onto Menti, but now we're going to be talking about open science. Okay, so now actually getting into the how to kind of narrowing down this higher level conversation about who is in Earth observation and what do we want to do with it, but now actually talking about how are you sitting at the table going to actually accomplish this and how can you integrate this into your workflow. So how familiar are you with these tools? GitHub, Borealis, Zenodo, UBC Circle. Have you heard of them? Have you used them? Have you used them in your research? Do people in your lab use them? Would you like to use them, but you haven't tried?
Borealis is more common than Zenodo.
GitHub, head and shoulders above all of the other ones. So that's good. I mean, code management and data management go hand in hand, so that's awesome to see. That's great that everyone is leaning towards using GitHub. Yes, Harry.
I have no idea can you explain what Circle is super briefly?
We'll get there.
We'll get there.
Yeah. I'm guessing you've never heard of it.
That's me.
Oh, believe me,
Yeah.
you're gonna hear about it.
Perfect. Okay.
They will.
All right. And another open-ended question. What do you think the benefits are of open science? We have a couple that we've thought of or read about, so we want to see how many you guys can come up with just on your own before we talk about it as a group. Open science being basically opening up the scientific process, making everything a bit more reproducible, a bit more open, a bit more accessible. Collaboration and collaborative. That's great to see. Accessibility and accessible. Accountability. That's awesome. Transparency, shareable knowledge, more collaboration opportunities, diversity in research, repeatable research and reproducibility, shareable knowledge. These are all really good. So yeah, we're like honing in on the idea of reproducibility and accessibility as well as transparency within the scientific process. Okay. Okay. So yeah, I feel like everyone touched on a lot of these ideas. But open science, meaning in our context, open access data and cloud computing and remote sensing, supporting open science frameworks. But a lot of these benefits, a lot of these words were already mentioned, like collaboration, reproducibility and data continuity, innovation, accountability, trust, efficiency, change and availability. So I think we kind of covered that general idea of a lot of the benefits of open science. And before we get you to actually go and make your own open science workflow, this is just kind of an example of how I would envision an open science workflow. So from start to finish, this might look like determining your project objectives, but in collaboration with other scientists, researchers, community members, and experts. And then when we go to actually completing the research project, this might look like downloading and collecting data from open source archives or cloud computing interfaces, data cleaning and pre-processing, which might be using open source software like Python and R, as well as GIS software, moving to the data analysis that would again be hopefully using these open source platforms, and data visualization using the same things. And then all of this can be ideally controlled with a version control like Git. And then what we're going to focus on for mostly the rest of the workshop is this sharing and publishing kind of final step, which is using open access journals and that avoid paywalls and using open source data archives to share your data with other people. So just, yeah, we're really going to be focusing on this last step, but in terms of a whole workflow, this would be the ideal setup that you'd use for your research. And these are mostly just for when you have access to the slides after this. If you leave this workshop still having no idea where you would even start to go look for remote sensing data, these are some of the links to go to open access remote sensing data. So this is more just for your personal reference later when we hand out the slides, but these are some actual places where you can go download remote sensing data, and we wanted this to be part of the slide deck that you have access to.
Okay, great. So we're going to start by talking about data repositories. So a data repository is a location for you to store your data. There are a lot of different data repositories in the world, and they're often very specific to the discipline. So one that a lot of people use because it's very flexible is called Zenodo. One that we'll highlight that today. Another one is the Global Biodiversity GBIF data. And that is like basically a bunch of plant identifications. Personally, I hosted my master's research on a repository called SoilTemp, that is soil temperature data collected across the globe. There's more localized repositories. So Tree Search is specifically for US Forest Service publications and data, or there's the Open Science Foundation. All of these have different requirements and different applications. And again, we included a link to, there's a repository of repositories. because there's so many repositories, for you to look and see where you might be searching data, and where you might want to deposit your data. One thing to think about when we're working on where to put our data is whether or not the data repository adheres to FAIR standards. And that means that the data that we place there is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And for data to be findable, it has to have a way for the metadata associated with it to have keywords that when you search something, it brings it up. So for example, if I was really interested in stream hydrology, if I'm able to go to a data repository and search stream hydrology North America, ideally in that data repository, I would have a list of hydrologic data sets associated with that search term. Now, that's not something that is actually standardized across data repositories. Additionally, the data must be accessible. So I should be able to download that data. I should be able to work with that data. To be interoperable, which means that it's not dependent on your specific system. The data and the product should not change if you change what computer you're working with. It should have housing like within it of which packages you utilize, right? So packages as they update in their versioning, that can alter results. I just actually collaborated with somebody who is using an older version of a linear model network, and the updated version changed one of the interaction terms. So that's an example of something that you want to have housed and reusable. So it should be able to be incorporated later on, like in my meta-analyses, where you don't have a switch between solar radiation. Okay, so why do we care about the Digital Research Alliance when we're talking about data repositories? Well, it's because the Digital Research Alliance is the broader Canadian collaboration for how we're supposed to interact on our data. So they support data management and data sharing across all federally funded research. Your supervisor has definitely talked to somebody who works for the Digital Research Alliance. The librarians at UBC all collaborate with the Digital Research Alliance, and they provide the technical documentation for these research data management plans. Now, their technical documentation is not what you as a graduate student will be working with, but should you ever become a PI, it is exactly what you're going to be working with. And so they provide training and documentations to standardize that data reporting. And we're just going to highlight some of the research repositories under the Alliance. One of them is actually not a data repository. Lunaris is actually a repository of repositories again. So you can search from Lunaris for Canadian specific data repositories. But another one that they support is Borealis and Zenodo. And then finally, at a PI level, you have the Federal Research Data Repository. So if you're working with Canadian Forest Service data, that can get housed under the Federal Research Data Repository. And here's some things to think about when you're choosing where to store your data. What is the focus? Who's eligible? What is your data type? Size limitations, metadata requirements, and then data preservation. And that's something that is on you. Questions about Zenodo, about research repositories? Yeah.
Can you say like at the PI level for the last row there? What do you mean for that?
Yeah, so the Federal Research Data Repository, I, as a graduate student, cannot submit data to the Federal Research Data Repository. The only person that can host data under the Federal Research Repository is the principal investigator on whatever federal project. And so if you would like to have your data posted on there, it has to be done by your PI. You can't get a login, basically. Whereas I can get a login to Zenodo, Borealis, and Lunaris. Are there questions? Okay. So what are we talking about? We're talking about Borealis, Zenodo, and UBC Circle. So UBC Circle is not part of the Digital Research Alliance, but it is something that you will become very familiar with at the end of your degree, because all of your PhD theses, all of your master's theses, all of your data associated with that thesis should be hosted on UBC Circle. I took like an extra week to graduate from my master's because I uploaded my thesis and then they emailed me and they're like, we see in your acknowledgements that you've also included your data at another repository. Any data included at another repository must also be hosted at UBC Circle. So something to keep in mind, you post your data to Zenodo, you better also be able to post it to Circle. Otherwise they will not let you graduate. Borealis is for all Canadian universities. So University of Toronto, UBC, all of those collaborate on Borealis for storing data. And then Zenodo is not technically associated with Canada specifically. It is just a general repository that is supported by the Digital Research Alliance, but it's a bigger, broader repository. So Borealis is a Canadian open access repository hosted by Canadian institutions. It used to be called something else, and now it's called Borealis. You can deposit data sets, research software, and any other digital artifacts. All of the submissions have a digital object identifier. That is a key thing to remember from this, is that all of our data repositories ideally have a digital object identifier. So on our publications, on our emails, on everything, we can say, you can go to this location and you can download the data that I'm talking about. It supports versioning of data sets. So if you need to update a data set, you can say this version 1 was published and then version 2 was published. And it's specifically designed to meet the needs of Canadian researchers and their collaborators. It's actually designed as a social science repository, but has been adjusted to also incorporate all social science is real science, other science, STEM-based science. So additionally, Borealis has a demo mode. So if we go to Borealis, you'll see up here in this tagline that I'm at demo.borealisdata.ca. So say that you're trying to host your data for the first time and you're actually very nervous about uploading it. Well, that's okay, because there's a demo mode where you can practice. And so this is just Brienne's Borealis. And so we can get an idea for what Borealis looks like here, where we have a search. And the way that Borealis works is you have data sets and you have data verses. A data verse refers to a broader collection. So when we search University of British Columbia, what we see is that we have 369 data verses and 1,340 data sets. So we have 369 UBC associated like repositories, but then underneath that we have individualized data sets. So we can click on the University of British Columbia Dataverse, and then we can see that there's a repository that they created in 2024 for practicing data curation. But let's just click through and see an example here. So one example that we're gonna that I wanted to showcase was this data set associated with the UBC Farm monthly bird surveys. So here we have our digital object identifier. We have that it's version 1. We have what this is, a general subscription, what subject it falls under. And then as we look down, we see that there's files and then also a metadata. So our files are our bird records, and then our monthly bird data are our metadata. And it's just important to think about what you're incorporating into your metadata. And this is a pretty good, very simplistic example. And so I can click on this and I can just download that PDF. And then once I do that, I can click into it and you'll see there's an overview of the data set, file information, what's included, and a data set description. With all of these tabular files, another important thing is that you describe what your columns are associated with. So for example, when I uploaded my master's data to the soil temperature, they had a standardized table that I had to adhere to. And in this example, we have the date, the bird, the station, the count, the year, the month. But if I was just looking at station, I wouldn't really know what that meant if I was looking at the CSV. But now I can go to the dataset variables and I can say that the station is the location on the UBC farm. So now if I were to go back to that repository and then go to download the CSV file, oh, I don't want to contact the owner. Oh, shoot. Accept. And now I can click on this. Oh. Okay. I can click on this and I can see the locations of the UBC font on the CSV file. Questions associated with metadata and CSVs and accessing through data repository, the Borealis demo mode. The great thing about demo mode is that you can go to my data in demo mode and you can start to upload data and it will not be stored anywhere. Anything you do in demo mode is not remembered. It's not stored anywhere. You can just practice, which is wonderful and less scary for when you actually need to do it. Okay, questions about Borealis? Borealis is great. It's standardized. UBC library is able to help you upload it to it. What about Zenodo? So Zenodo is a broader open access repository. It accepts data sets, research software. It was created by the European Union under Open Air. Again, it also has a digital object identifier and it supports versioning as well. So Zenodo, similar to Borealis in Dataverses, has the thing called research communities. So if you are interested in one specific outcome associated with like one research university, you can go to a research community. So we can go to the Digital Research Alliance to look at how they might have a simple data management plan. But just before we go there, we on this webpage will see the version history, the DOI, and the number of times that the data set's been accessed. So I can click on this link and we are now looking at what the Digital Research Alliance provides to, again, this is mostly for principal investigators on developing a data management plan for their grant applications. But you can see that it gives an overview of what this like data management plan should include and how to create one. It also includes some more resources on developing data management plans specific to Borealis. And they even have like a document, they have like a GUI on how to make a data management plan or a graphical user interface. So I just wanted to walk through how we would upload the contents of this workshop to Zenodo. So to do so, we need to develop a name and effective tags. We need to add collaborators to work on the draft version of this workshop. We need to specify a license. So anytime you publish data, you are publishing it associated with a license that has terms and conditions associated with it. Are people able to use it without citing you, or like, what do they need to include in the citations? And then how we would publish and access our DOI. So I'm going to switch actually to here. Okay. Come over here. Oh, I guess that I didn't think about this for the Zoom.
Have you joined the Zoom call?
I have joined the Zoom call.
Can you just share your screen?
Yes. Okay, perfect. Sure. Perfect. Okay. So here we have this now. Perfect. So now we have my Zenodo. We have the uploads that I'm working on, the communities and the requests. So here I have the title. So again, our workshop is called the DRI-EDIA project, Advancing Equity and Diversity in Forestry, Digital Research Infrastructure and Deep Learning for All. with an overview. So I can click on this data set. And you'll see that the first thing I've included is a README. That README is going to give an overview of what the data set is about and what it includes. Zenodo, unlike other research repositories, has what's called a flat data structure, which means that it doesn't support folders, which has advantages and disadvantages. But that means that you have to be very specific in your naming. Otherwise, it won't be very findable. People actually have a lot of complaints about Zenodo and adhering to fair research principles. But I can drag and drop files. And again, I get up to 50 gigabytes of files. So that's actually a pretty big number for free. We have a digital object identifier. If you already have a DOI, like say your data is already hosted on UBC Circle, you would include that DOI here. So you don't want to have double DOIs because that would make it harder to actually find the original data set. We have the type of resource, the title, the publication date, and then I've added Brianne as a creator, and I have given a description of what it is, and then I've attributed a Creative Commons license, as well as an MIT license. You can do more research on the various different licensees, but Creative Commons and MIT licenses are both very common for working with data sets. GitHub often requires you to also specify a license, and many people choose MIT or Creative Commons because they're very flexible. I will also include keywords and subjects. So this is what's going to help people find my data set when they search, and languages. You can also, as this one is right now, embargo, where that is, references, software, trying to find where the embargoing is. Maybe not. Oh, here it is. Okay, restricted, apply an embargo. So say you are waiting to publish a paper, you already have the data processed, but the paper itself is not online. You'd want to apply an embargo to protect those files until a certain date. And then it would become accessible and searchable. So that's Zenodo. Questions about Zenodo? Yeah.
So like, what's the benefit of uploading your data to additional repository if you already have them on like with UBC server?
Yeah, mostly that it's searchable. So like I'm conducting a meta-analysis right now, and so when I conduct a meta-analysis, I'm going to repositories that I know will have that data to search for data sets like that. I'm not going to go to University of Minnesota, University of British Columbia individually and search for that type of data. So if you would like your data set to be incorporated into broader global collaboration, hosting it on larger or multiple repositories is really useful, because people won't always search all of them.
I got a question from online, and when they're asking if you are looking for a data set, can you show how to find a relevant data set like wildfire?
Yeah. Yes. I did actually search Zenodo when I was making my research protocol. Zenodo is notorious as not actually being that easy to search, which is another argument for hosting it many different places. But say I wanted to do wildfire Beast, British Columbia. Fine. Then here, oh, Anna Talushi's on here. Cool. Wait, that's actually great. So here's just an example. You just search it by best match. And then this is going to be, we can click into this. Another person I met at the American Geophysical Union. She's great. And we see that there's a README, and then there's also her script data associated with her 2019 paper. And then for the code, it's located on GitHub. So that would just be an example of how we might search for it. But you can see that Zenodo doesn't have the easiest like searching. You kind of really have to like read through it, unfortunately. There's not like a bunch of tags associated with it. An imperfect system. Yeah.
This might be a silly question, but so if you were just, like, say I was looking for tree ring chronologies and I just type into Google, okay, I'm looking for a tree ring database. What are the odds that something from either of these sources is going to come up? Specifically, like, so UBC Circle is not searchable, like it won't show up in your Google searches or.
It can, but in proper literature searching, you wouldn't be fully inclusive. Specific targeted searching like this, as well as following up on reference seeding. So like finding a specific citation, finding a paper that then search like includes their data on that repository, and then looking at what the metadata tags are associated with it to like then find those later publications. But for like all of the research that I found for the tree, like through the USFS tree search, none of that would have showed up on my Google, and none of that showed up on Web of Science, and none of that showed up on Google Scholar. That was all something that I had to find by scraping tree search itself.
So your best bet is to go into either one of these repositories and then search for them.
Yeah, and this is called gray literature searching compared to proper citation searching. So things like Scopus and Web of Science have very specific metadata associated with them for publications, whereas Zenodo and data repositories are within the gray literature sphere. They don't have like one specific, like this is all the things that you need to include. Okay. Okay, and then I am just going to go back to here. And I'm sorry, we're gonna have to fast forward. Zenodo also has a demo mode for you to work in. So if you're scared to host on Zenodo, there's also a sandbox mode associated with that. UBC Circle, final last one. UBC Circle, again, you cannot graduate unless you upload to UBC Circle. So you will have to work with UBC Circle. It allows researchers to share and preserve their scholarly work. Again, provides a DOI, supports a wide variety of digital types, and most helpfully, the UBC librarians are all very, very much trained to help you load your data onto UBC Circle because you cannot graduate without it. I have hosted my research in UBC Circle, but it's really something that is prioritized for the end of your degree. But you can publish at any point in your degree, and if you talk to a librarian, they'll tell you, please publish when you can. I haven't. Questions about UBC Circle? I'm not going to go through it specifically right now. Okay. Now we're gonna shift into a 15-minute break. There is food that people can help with, and then afterwards we're gonna do a practice activity in collaboration.
This break, grab some food.
Then I'm down. Load. Okay. And then I'm on the Zoom, so I can just.
Yeah, you're
upload it.
sharing. Oh, and then you're on Zoom.
Yes. How do I insert a? There's a way to send files on Zoom.
Is there?
Not so. More. Share. Documents. Advanced. Okay, well, you know what I will do? Do this. Load. It is. The Wi-Fi is slow.
Is it? I believe.
I am just gonna share a link.
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so you want to introduce it?
You can.
Okay, so after we've learned all about research data management, we're now going to go through the process of making a research data management plan. Included here are a 5-step process. Data types, storage, data organization, documentation and metadata, access, sharing and reuse, and preservation and archiving. These are eerily similar to the 5-step process on research data management that we introduced earlier on in this project or in this discussion. And then there's some key things to consider along side of each one of these. So we recommend maybe partnering up with 1 to 2 other people and trying to work out a research data management plan for a very simple project. So maybe you're researching the number of bunnies at Jericho Beach. What? Yeah. So what sort of data? So what is the purpose of the project? To find the number of bunnies and also their locations at Jericho Beach. Data types and storage, what type of data will be produced? Well, there's probably going to be a tabular data set describing count of bunnies and the locations that you did it, took those bunny counts. Maybe you're also trying to map them with drones. So maybe you're also going to have a raster file that describes the location, or that's an ortho image of bunnies. Data organization. What will you use to format the data, and what naming convention will you use? I personally have many times in my PhD reorganized my file naming, and I'm also like, yeah, at this point I just include a README file under every large data repository. What project can take identifiers? So, a good example of this might be if you are working on a research project and maybe every file is going to start with bunny underscore. So bunny underscore counts, bunny underscore locations, bunny underscore metadata, something like that associates it with the project. How will you preserve privacy, security? This is more important when you're working as a social scientist. But say there were personal identifiers associated with the researchers or with the bunnies themselves, then you'd want to have a way to protect that confidential data. If there needs to be an embargo period, maybe Vancouver is going to vote on whether or not to kill the bunnies, and you don't want people to know how many bunnies there are before they go to vote on it. Data sharing and preservation. Question. Okay. Wonderful. If you guys have any questions, we are here to answer them.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I'm gonna use the washroom.
Okay.
Okay.
Make sure.
The 27th. Yeah, it's in my schedule. Yeah, it's in my schedule. All right, everybody, we're gonna start to wrap up.
Good stuff there.
So yeah, that was really a whirlwind to go over a lot of like what is a data research or research management plan, how would you use it, and start thinking about it in the context of remote sensing. But really the worksheet was just an exercise to get you to actually start thinking about this in terms of your own research or a research question. So yeah, we kind of just want to have a discussion about how it went, even if you didn't make it all the way through the workshop to complete a continuous research management plan, just talking about yeah, how did it go? What data sets did you talk about? Yeah.
Talk about the challenges of going through DRI data.
So true.
Yeah. And proper naming. It's showing an example of one of the projects that I'm working on, and the naming was very far from clear.
The other thing that can happen with DRI and results data is that they can update the naming. And then you have to find like, what did this mean in the 1990s versus now? I'm finding that.
Been there.
Yeah.
Been trying to figure out what the VRI column names mean.
Yeah.
Been there.
I got a website,
Oh, perfect.
but yeah, that's difficult to figure out. So
Yeah.
well, I'll find that.
Yeah. Nice. So your question was, or what data did you try and access, or were you thinking about accessing?
Yeah, one thing we were thinking of is like, well, for Rosie's project, she has sort of like CSV data, but also like some spatial data. So like figuring out how to store those that are like two sort of disparate data types in like a unified, organized manner. Right.
Did you come up with anything good?
No.
Oh, just talking about the difficulties of that.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Anyone else? Yeah.
We were discussing about compile all the data that was generated for the Silva 21 project.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of not only remote sensing data, but tree rings or different forest inventories or experiments or tribes or whatever. So it's kind of very diverse kind of project that is happening there. So it's kind of thinking about okay, how flexible should be that kind of data management plan to storage all these kind of different kind of data. And then of course, because it's a research project, we don't think like it should be like a access to the public, so it's kind of be restricted access. So that should be a platform that allows to have different permissions to different, depending of the data you are allowed to use. So we kind of
Difficult.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's not something that Zenodo and Borealis would allow you to do, have that like different levels of access. You can have like password protected files, I guess, when you download them. Yeah. I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah. I'm Globus again.
Are you gonna say something?
Yeah, so another thing that I was thinking about is that like I'm using data that's already hosted publicly from the New Brunswick government, but I'm sort of taking tiny segments of it and using that in my research in a more organized manner. And I don't think I'm sort of allowed to post those sort of like clipped areas of the data set, but I can sort of like, yeah, so I sort of like in my data description of the paper, I sort of describe this is where I got it from, and then this is how I processed it. Yeah, it's sort of difficult to share it when it's hosted by someone. You're using a data set that's hosted by someone else, I guess, right?
Yeah, totally. And me and Yue just had a conversation about this where I was kind of posing the same question. It's like, okay, if I've accessed open source data and I haven't really manipulated it or done anything to it, but it was kind of like a challenge for me to go away and process that. Like, would I go then and host this on a data sharing platform, even though I also accessed it open source and didn't really do a ton to it? But then Yue was saying like, decreasing that processing time so the other person doesn't have to go and completely understand your workflow just to be able to download your data and reproduce it is a huge benefit of just the whole greater concept of open science. I think like that's a really strong arguing point. So I totally see where you're coming from, and then I do see the benefit as well. And then I think it comes down to like permissions and who needs to access it and how. Yeah, that's a discussion that's come up already a couple times. Yeah. And yeah.
Not really about the actual discussion, but kind of related to that. I am kind of struggling to figure out, like, if you have data that was taken by someone, like maybe you hired or something, that's like for your project, and you're using that for data analysis, like how does that work?
That would be within the hiring contract.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if this is the data we inflew, we already shared that with pretty much every collaborator, so.
Okay, I just don't know what the contract is.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you'd be fine to share that.
Okay.
The only ones that I don't share from that entire project are this is part of the Scantiques Roadshow, if anybody was tracking that. But the only ones that I don't share from that are like New Brunswick, JD Irving data, because that's very private. Yeah.
But yeah, I guess like just generally, I think it depends on like who collected your data, what agreement you have with them, and then going into the contract there and then talking to like your PI or like the other researchers to understand like what their vision is in terms of, is this data going to be completely open source, or is this specific to our research question and maybe we're not going to host it, but it does get hosted somewhere where there's like limited access or something. But yeah, I think at the actual project level, it's more specific about like who's willing.
It's like, gee, we're partners, but so Sarah will fly the drones and collect the data, but they essentially want the raw data to remain private. Whereas we then will publish scientific papers, which their community probably doesn't read, and we can say, this is the data that we collected, here's like the code, but we wouldn't make
The
raw
data is,
accessible. We would make like our interpretations and our figures accessible.
There's a level of like minimum reproducibility.
Especially because those are privately owned forests versus.
Yes.
When you're like, kind of like clouding your data, like especially if it's collected in like a private way, and like you're doing it for one company, and then you want to still make like a reproducible result. Do you have any like things that you found that have really worked? Well, instead of being like mining site 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's a great question.
I think like, at least I'm not aware of like a golden standard, because obviously like the goal is open science, the goal is complete open access and reproducibility, but that's not realistic in today's day. I don't know if that'll ever be realistic, so it's kind of like shooting really far ahead of what is actually going to be accomplishable. But I feel like in some cases, you know, if that data is really locked down and it's private, it will just look like that, where it's like mining site 1, 2, and 3, and maybe you give like general locations or like kind of descriptions of like topographic information, that kind of stuff, like whatever you can, but then you might not be releasing the actual raw data files, and then just making your workflow, which we didn't really cover here, like we were mostly talking about like hosting data, but making your code reproducible, making like your results and like analysis more reproducible, and that can be open source, but then maybe the data is not so much. But yeah, it's not realistic in all cases, especially like in the resource management sector specifically. There's a lot of privately owned data sets and like private kind of projects. Yeah.
And something to think about when you're choosing a license as well. What is the shareability of that data?
I mean, even from my experience, even working with different federal governments in Canada, when you have access to the permanent sample plots, for example, you need to sign like a data agreement.
Right. Yeah.
And you are not allowed to share that, the data that they provided to you. So it's like, you can share the code, whatever, but you cannot share the data that they give it to you. And also normally the data, the coordinates that they give it to you, you have to ask for the proper coordinates, especially when we're working with remote sensing data, because we need accuracy in that coordinates, because normally the data that they have there from the different platform or repositories, like a coordinates that pass kind of, you know. there are proximity locations, so you need to ask it. But also, you are not allowed to share with anybody about that location.
Yeah, that's a good example. When I uploaded to the soil temp, you could like specify the accuracy of the geolocation. So maybe your raw data isn't accessible, but what if the geolocation was within 400 meters, half a kilometer? Then all of a sudden that decreases the specificity of that data and the ability of people to use it elsewhere, and then you can't host it.
Yep.
Cool. Well, it is wrap up time. Thank you all so much for coming. We want to thank our sponsors and collaborators. Again, this was funded by the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. I encourage you to look at their website as well as their Zenodo repositories to learn more about research and data management. Any final questions? No.
More of a comment than a question. There are 2 other workshops, which are,
The 27th of February and the 24th of March.
there you go. Yeah.
About more about the machine learning and deep learning in forestry studies. And so looking forward you will join us. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Everybody should feel free to take a stand on the way out. Awesome.
Thanks, Claire.
Bye, Claire. See you later.
Thank you both.